This place gives you the creeps, doesn't it? I couldn't disagree with Sandhu's assessment of the bizarre room we found ourselves in. The monitors only illuminated the area up until a certain point. However, we couldn't see any walls, which meant the place had to be bigger than what could be seen, either by a little or a lot. We couldn't know unless we decided to venture further into the darkness. Neither of us took that initiative, though, keeping it a mystery. Still, it didn't feel like anybody was in there with us, so we allowed ourselves to relax a bit. I took the first sitting shift, lying back in the chair and focusing on the monitor that I deemed the most interesting at the moment. Wirehead versus Luz. Who was I rooting for? None of them. Nevertheless, I was morbidly eager to see these two horrific titans square off. Among us, we'd crafted an unofficial tier system, ranking each respective void in terms of the estimated threat that they posed, in comparison to each other. The tiers went as such: Tornado, which is the weakest; Tsunami; Hurricane, middle tier; Earthquake; Asteroid. Highest, imminent death, get the fuck out. They're also divided into subdivisions: high, low, mid, etc. With that said, Luz was around a high tornado whilst Whitehead was a mid tsunami. A glaring difference between them, but not enough that would make it impossible for Luz to win. "Want to make a bet?" asked Sandhu, half-jokingly. He chuckled. "You know my luck's cursed, but I guess if we don't make it out of here alive, then my debt's null anyway." Luz was more of a defensive combatant, so it wasn't surprising when Wirehead initiated the conflict. He twirled his bat around, still with remnants of guard flesh clinging to it, in a near-mocking fashion at Luz. He was a delinquent after all. Luz hardly reacted, of course. That's just the way he was. In response, he stepped forward, electricity flickering through his hands and up into his forearms. Wirehead followed suit, unleashing a big swing at Luz's head, which he managed to intercept with one of his forearms. Nevertheless, the wire still pierced his skin. Wirehead followed up with a headbutt. This time, it connected with the flesh side of Luz's face, slicing him up rather gruesomely. But despite his seemingly grievous injuries, he remained unwavering. That was the thing about Luz. He was incapable of feeling any pain. Like I said, his exact origins remained a mystery, but the one thing we knew about him for sure was the fact that he hailed from some kind of ancient clan residing in the Arctic Circle. In fact, he was the sole survivor of an incident that decimated his village, and he was hungry for revenge against the unknown force that did it. After taking that headbutt, Luz was now in striking range. He formed his fingers into an arrow shape and drove them into Wirehead's solar plexus before electrocuting his insides. Wirehead quaked in pain as he swung his bat in a frenzied rage, just about demolishing Luz's ribcage. No reaction from him, though. Instead, he took his other hand and wrapped it around Wirehead's neck. Any normal person would have succumbed to Luz's electrical shocks after a few seconds, but of course Wirehead was no normal person. Despite blood pouring out of his chest wound and the skin on his neck beginning to bubble, he picked Luz up by the torso and slammed him over the steel railing. He fucking broke his back. Even without sound, the metal audio of a spine snapping reverberated through my mind. Unsurprisingly, Luz didn't bat an eye. Wirehead went in for the kill, tossing Luz's body onto the ground before smashing it until it resembled nothing more than a mess of bloody pulp and broken bones. But somehow, he was still alive. Amongst the gruesome pile, I could see an eye blink. Once Wirehead had exhausted himself from his relentless swinging, Luz took his chance. Using his one arm that hadn't been smashed to bits, he crawled over and grabbed Wirehead by the foot, before scaling himself up to his neck. Once there, he drilled his fist into Wirehead's forehead, utterly shredding his own hand in the process. In the end, it was worth the sacrifice. He was able to electrocute Wirehead's brain, finally causing the behemoth to drop. "So, I guess he won?" Sandhu said. "I guess." I had my own reservations about calling Luz's performance a victory. By the end of it all his limbs and spine had been shattered, and not an inch of his body wasn't hosting a series of deep cuts. The good side of his face had also been chipped away to the skull, leaving only his eye and half his nose intact. And yet, he didn't move with a hint of desperation or concern, calmly crawling away from the scene using only his one mangled hand. I could still see a current flowing between it as well, the telltale sign that he was ready to pick up another fight. "Nice. Comeback victory," Sandhu said. "I don't see him making it far, though. Not as a tornado tier." "Yeah, but we made all that shit up. It doesn't really mean anything." Truth be told, I was nearly rooting for Luz at the end there. Something about his resilience resonated with me, as bizarre as it may seem. I scanned the rest of the monitors. While Wirehead and Luz were squaring off, the undead Nazi had burnt Diazak to a crisp. On another monitor, Morgie playing around with the void corpse that I recognized as Death Shadow. He chose his own name. 3 down, I muttered to myself. "Fuck, we got a big one coming up," Sandhu announced. I followed his eyes to the monitor near the bottom of the room. He was right. This one was going to be good. Standing at opposite sides of the kitchen were Trench, 6'3", weighing 330 pounds, and Senju, 5'10", weighing 148 pounds. Trench was a silent entity, dressed entirely in ancient-looking deep-sea diving gear, except for the head, which remained without a helmet. However, you couldn't get a glimpse of the face regardless. That's due to the fact that his features were completely distorted, so much so that if you tried focusing on the details, all you were getting was a nasty migraine. On top of that, he was invisible in person. Let me explain. If he was standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be able to see him. The only way you get a glimpse of him was through secondary means, cameras, mirrors, etc., which made him all the more dangerous. As for how he killed people, it was either by brute force using his monstrous strength, or by his death aura, as those guards have dubbed it. Similar to Diazak's zone, once you were in his close vicinity, you'd feel an astronomical amount of pressure and get crushed on the spot, comparable to what you'd feel standing at the bottom of the ocean. But that's only if Trench wills it. Sometimes he'll turn the aura off and simply punch somebody's head off. For that reason, he was in the mid-hurricane tier. As for Senju, well, he was basically a psychotic, demon-possessed martial artist with supernatural levels of speed, strength, and agility. He apparently trained with the Wraith style, or the technique beyond human comprehension, whatever the hell those were supposed to mean. When he gets serious, his eyes will roll to the back of his head and black veins will appear to be bulging from underneath his skin. At that point, he'll be moving so fast that his motions become impossible to keep up with visually, and a single punch from him will be enough to completely vaporize a human head. But in all honesty, he's one of the least malicious voids out of the bunch. If you're weak, like us guards, he won't even spare you a glance, granted you stay out of his way. The only thing that he's really looking for are strong opponents to fight. But when he can't find one, he starts to get antsy, and then problems emerge. We've pegged him at low hurricane. "Can Senju even see Trench?" Sandhu asked. "I guess so," I responded. The question was worth asking, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Trench's aura/invisibility simply didn't work on him at all. That seemed to be the case, since Senju decided to strike first. He rushed forward at unfathomable speed, directing what must have been 100 of strikes in succession at Trench. However, none of them fazed the obscure diver. I could see Senju's lips curling into a psychotic grin at that fact. He certainly found what he was looking for. The floor beneath him cracked as his eyes turned white and his grotesque veins began bulging. If we couldn't see his strike before, it was beyond impossible now. He rushed forward, unleashing a maelstrom of lightning-like punches, elbows, and kicks against Trench. This went on for about 5 seconds before he was stopped in his tracks. Trench had grabbed him by the throat, still not looking any worse for wear in the process. I could see Senju mouth something to the effect of, "What the fuck?" before he was tossed into a metal fridge. It certainly appeared as if Trench was too much of a tank for him to handle. Nevertheless, Senju got back up and cracked his shoulder into place whilst blood leaked from his mouth, and then he let out a shriek. Crazy fucker, I thought to myself. What the hell did it take for somebody to become like this? At that point, he'd seemingly given up on technique entirely. Instead, he grabbed a handful of kitchen knives and began chucking them at Trench. While none of them pierced the suit, one of them managed to stick in his distorted head, which evidently dealt some damage. Trench flinched, before taking the knife and throwing it back at Senju, who in turn caught it effortlessly. At this point, he was howling in what I assumed was some kind of fucked up sadomasochistic jubilation. He'd found a weak point. Senju rushed back in at Trench, knife in hand, before slashing away at its face. Spurts of viscous, dark blue blood stained the kitchen floor, along with Senju's own face. Soon enough, the knife snapped, and Trench threw a desperation punch at Senju's temple. He managed to block it with his own forearm, although I could see his bones cracking from the impact. He leapt back as his arm hung limp to his side, dodging a follow-up haymaker. Throughout everything, a grin remained plastered on his face. His veins were bulging out so hard that I found it hard to believe they weren't going to completely burst altogether. With one arm, Senju lifted a metal table and swung it to the side of Trench's head, nearly taking it off in the process. He was wasting no time, grabbing a large frying pan and pouncing at his incapacitated opponent, knocking them both over in the process. He then took a position atop Trench's body, furiously slamming the pan into his face. "Martial arts, eh?" I could hear Senju mutter. After what must have been 250 blows, the pan broke. On the ground, Trench's head had been obliterated no less than 50 strikes prior. Senju tossed the scrap metal aside and looked at the ceiling, presumably screaming his lungs sore in sheer competitive delight. "Well, looks like our tier system still means fuck all." Despite the morbid scene unfolding in front of us, Santu shared a laugh with me. We were at the point where the absolute absurdity and danger of the situation was beginning to fade from our senses. Hell, I suppose we were enjoying ourselves, as fucked up as that may sound. We kept watching as Senju got up and stumbled around, evidently disorientated from both his injuries and successive fits of fighting spirit-induced rage euphoria. He took about 4 steps before his head exploded, throwing the two of us watching through quite the loop. Another figure stepped into the frame, whom we recognized as Satanbot. 6 feet 11 inches, 535 pounds. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine upon seeing him, somewhat snapping me back into reality. Despite his comical name, Satanbot had to be one of the most frightening voids out there. I just couldn't understand what the fuck it was supposed to be. His body appeared to be robotic, but moved in ways that were too fluid for even the most sophisticated android, like legitimate metallic flesh. It was honestly maddening to look at. On top of that, he literally resembled the fucking devil himself. Reddish-black scaly skin/metallic shell, a mouth full of exposed razor-like teeth, rectangular slanted crimson eyes, a pair of large mechanical wings, and a long tail extending in something that resembled a 3-pronged spear to boot. For whatever reason, he also had a rocket launcher atop his right shoulder, and a Gatling gun connected to his left hand. No, these were not mechanical modifications. They were literally connected to his body. He was unanimously considered one of the most dangerous voids residing in the chasm, rated at high earthquake. Even if Senju was at his full strength, he wouldn't have stood a chance. "Oh shit," Santu commented. "I was hoping he didn't escape." "Well, let's not worry about him now," I said, turning my attention to another monitor. What my eyes had landed on next was an utter massacre. Sitting atop a pile of guard bodies that must have eclipsed 6 feet was Hugo Wright, aka the brutal bishop, 6'2", 200 pounds. Like his name indicated, he was dressed in a traditional vicar-priest outfit. The only difference was the fact that the cross he wore around his neck was fashioned out of blades. The man himself had long, sweeping black hair and about 14 bags under both of his dead blue eyes. It was unclear to us what his real motivations were. It's not like he really followed the rules of any religion on Earth, despite his outfit. He just went on long rants about the sin of natalism, and the futility of existence, and how, to reach a state of sanctity, we must first reach a clean state. Basically, he wanted to kill every sentient being on Earth, and then himself. He wasn't all talk either. He was certainly strong. We rated him at low hurricane. After praying to whatever fucked up deity he worshipped atop his pile of corpses, he slid down and began stalking the corridors for more victims to fulfill his holy objective. Who he came across next couldn't have been more perfect. Cale Silver, aka Vampire Cop. 5'9", 176 pounds. Cale was rather interesting, being that he was one of the most cooperative voids. In fact, he was the only prisoner that willingly turned himself in. His backstory was interesting as well, and one of the few we actually knew about. He used to be a prolific, merciless Brazilian cop who patrolled the dangerous parts of Rio. It was so much so that he earned the reputation among the criminals as the Reaper. But he was still only human. During one fateful mission, his entire unit was massacred during an ambush attack by about a dozen distinct gangs who were all unified under the same goal of taking him down. He was the only survivor, but was captured in the process. After being brutally tortured in a warehouse for about 5 hours, the light suddenly went out. During this period of darkness, the only sounds entering his ears were those of carnage. Every single gang member was being obliterated by some unknown force. At the end of the bloodbath, he could hear footsteps slowly approaching him, before a deep, raspy voice whispered something into his ear.
"There's potential in you. Allow me to bestow you with an opportunity."
He felt a sharp pain in his neck before the hidden entity spoke to him again.
"Fulfill your duty."
And then he passed out. When he woke up, he found himself in his bed, with all the wounds from his torture session just about healed. All wounds except for one. A bite mark on his neck. His appearance had also changed drastically. Pale skin, dark eyes and fangs. He'd heard about the stories, but could hardly comprehend that he'd become one himself. While he couldn't handle being exposed to the sun anymore, he found himself with superhuman strength and regeneration, which he used to brutalize criminals at night as a vigilante. However, it didn't take him long to go too far. One night, he went into a frenzy, breaking into a house of a suspected rapist and killing everybody inside. Everybody including the rapist's innocent mother and daughter. His resolve in regards to justice had never wavered, remaining strong no matter what he went through. For that reason, he could hardly live the guilt of his conscience, and walked to the police station he used to work at, turning himself in to his former colleagues that all thought he was dead. Of course, the news spread quickly. That's when the CIA stepped in and transferred him over to the chasm. He put up no resistance. In fact, he deemed the chasm a place where he 100% belonged. Safe to say, it was a rather bizarre case. We still put him in a low hurricane, same as Hugo. On the monitor, we could see Cale's lips moving. Wanting to hear what he had to say, I began looking around to see if I could get some audio. It didn't take too long for me to find the volume control panel, which was located right under the middle desk. Thankfully, whoever set this weird place up took the liberty of labeling each switch with its respective monitor.
"Dangerous scum. I'm gonna have to dispose of you before it's too late."
Hugo's face remained expressionless.
"Scum. An apt description of those residing in this place. But I understand that you're also a man wrought with unforgivable sin. I'll treat you no differently.
Kale chuckled.
Wouldn't expect you not to.
He took a provocative fighting stance.
Come on, Englishman. Let's settle this.
Hugo put his hand on the blade cross. Before muttering another prayer to himself, he looked up at Kale, his eyes now a deep crimson.
The atrocities I commit are only in the pursuit of ultimate holiness. I hope you can understand that.
Kale grinned.
Yeah, I get it. Crazy people are crazy.
As he finished the sentence, he rushed forward in a quick blur, sinking his fangs into Hugo's neck. In turn, Hugo grabbed Kale's head and twisted, snapping his neck in what had to be the most gruesome manner feasible before plunging a fist into his chest. For the first time, Hugo grimaced.
What's wrong with your heart?
He asked, before retracting his hand, revealing severe burn marks. Kale twisted his head back into place before shooting Hugo a bloody grin.
I couldn't tell you, buddy.
They traded blows for a few more minutes, pummeling each other into oblivion. While Kale was certainly more skilled and had more tools at his disposal, Hugo possessed more raw power. Eventually it came to a standstill. Kale had suffered upwards of 20 fatal injuries, forcing his regeneration abilities to the brink. Hugo was bleeding all over, had about 6 bone fractures, an eye gouged out, and an ear ripped off.
You're pretty fucking annoying, aren't you?
Hugo bent over, coughing up a mouthful of blood.
Likewise.
In the meantime, their confrontation had drawn an audience. Coming in from an intersecting corridor was Infernal Gladiator. 6'7", 285 pounds. He was a high hurricane. Imagine an extremely buff zombie that was perpetually burning, clad in ancient gladiator gear. That was him. In one of his hands, he gripped a gigantic flaming sword. In his other, he held 2 leashes, both holding respective voids at the neck, crawling at his feet like dogs straight from hell. One was the Freak, 6'10", 253 pounds, a slouching humanoid monster with strange flickering eyes and a grin that wrapped around its entire head. The other was the Humanish Centipede, 6'4", weighing 372 pounds, a centipede-like creature that had a vaguely human face covered in 6 eyes, with an iron muzzle obscuring the mouth area. It crawled on 10 colossal veiny arms. They were both mid-tornado tier, not incredibly powerful. They were merely simple, aggressive beasts that possessed nothing but primal bloodlust and strength that was comparable to 3 wild bears put together. For that reason, they were easily converted into disposable weapons by the much stronger and more intelligent gladiator.
Fucking hell.
Kale said upon seeing the trio.
That's fucking disgusting. Bloody abominations,
Hugo said.
Nothing but creatures that stain this earth.
They both looked at each other and nodded, an explicit sense of mutual understanding between them. I suppose that a few of the voids teaming up should have been inevitable. Oh boy, this is heating up, I said, turning towards Sandu. He didn't respond at first, instead looking as if he were trying to focus on something that wasn't the screen. What the hell's the matter? I asked him. I think there might be somebody else in here. Don't turn around. Just keep watching. Pretend like you didn't hear it. He replied, hardly above a whisper. It's not like I had to pretend. Hear what? I thought to myself. Nevertheless, I'd never seen Sandu more serious. I turned my attention back to the monitors, focusing my ears to be alert. And about 10 seconds later, I heard it. It was soft for sure. I wasn't surprised that I hadn't noticed it up until that point. Somewhere in the darkness behind us, somebody was definitely trying to contain a giggle. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you're an animal lover like me, please consider donating to the World Land Trust, a charity that aims to help wildlife through buying land, preventing development, and helping endangered species.